Oso ondo, egun guztioi, eskerrik asko, gaurkora etorri zaretelako. Lehenik eta behin, nik sarrera hitz batzuk egingo ditut, baina gurekin dauzkagu alde batetik Pedro Esnaola, eta beste batetik ondo esaten dudan Stepan Muigler, Suediatik etorri zaiguna. Eta gaurkoan, guk enfokatzen dugu gaurko ekitaldi hau, eta enmarkatzen dugu etorkizunarik izen barruan. Etorkizunarik iz Foraldundia jarri du neurri handi batean gobernantza tresna bat bezala, eta nahi duguna da batik bat, hemendik 10 urtera Gipuzkoan ze urrats ze apustu egin behar ditugun argitu eta martxan jarri elkarte eta gizarte osoarekin batera. Gure partetik behintzat, etorkizuna eraikizek markatzen du hemendik legislatura bukaera honetara egin behar dugun apusturik importantenetako bat, eta nahi dugu egin esperimentazio aktibo bat markatzen ditugun helburu guztietan. Esperimentazio aktibo horrek eramango gaitu galdera bati erantzutea. Galdera ez da zer gertatuko da hurrengo 10 urtetan lurraldean, baizik zer egingo dugun hurrengo 10 urtetan Gipuzkoan. Beraz, gure pentsamendu guztia izango da ekintzara bideratua eta horretarako bestanda gizarte antolatuarekin, mundu ekonomikoarekin, gizarte eragile guztiekin kolaborazio hori martxan jartzen dugu. Gaurko hitzaldi honetan, eta gaurko esan dezagun jardunaldi honetan, gu dauzkagu bi elementu guretzako oso interesgarria direnak eta aipatuko ditu labur-labur. Lehenengoa da, guk nahi duguna da Gipuzkoan apustu ekonomiko batzuk, apustu sozial batzuk egin, baina batik bat berrikuntzaren ikuspegitik, benetan zehaztu zeintzuk izango diren gure lurraldearen apustu importanteenak, ez? Dakizuen bezala Jaurlaritza jarri du martxan estrategia bat, espezializazio inteligentea martxan jartzeko, eta hor 3 gune nagusi daude. Bata energia, bigarrena da fabrikazio aurreratua, eta 3. bioteknologia, biozientziak osasuna. 3. arlo horretan, hegoaldeko Suediako herrialdea, erregioa bereziki importantea da, eta esan dezagu aitzindaria dela mundu mailan. Beraz, guretzako referentzia oso importante bada. Eta bigarren atala niretzako azpimarratzekoa da, herrialde eta estatu diferenteen arteko mugan dauden guneak, herrialdeak kolaborazioan jartzeko esperientzi oso aurreratua dela baita ere. Bai, alde batetik esan dezakegu Suedia hegoaldea eta Danimarka ekialdearen artean, hor sortu dute gune bat kolaboratzeko, eta guretzako bereziki interesgarria da esperientzi hori, hain zuzen ere arlo ekonomikoan egin dutelako apustua. Eta nik uste dut guk ere, gure iparraldearekin harremanak estutzeko modelo badira, eta hor bereziki intzidentzia egin barra dugu. Orain arte, iparraldeko autoridadeekin zertaz hitz egin dugu, mobilidadea, trenak, kultura, turismoa eta horrelako gauzak. Eta segurunez arlo, agenda ekonomikoa oraindik ez daukagu behar den bezala zehaztua. Esas serían las dos ideas, por lo tanto, que me parecen importantes subrayar. Por un lado, las apuestas que tenemos que hacer como territorio desde la perspectiva económica, y la región del sur de Suecia en ese aspecto es puntera, y el espacio también de colaboración entre, en este caso, las dos partes, los dos lados de la muga, que también tienen un espacio, en este caso, de inspiración con el sur de Suecia. Nos parece que ese ámbito tiene que tener un desarrollo económico y nos tenemos que inspirar. Etorkizunarik básicamente busca esa apertura a diferentes experiencias punteras en todo el mundo, y hoy tendríamos una oportunidad magnífica para hacerlo. Hori izan ere sarreratxoa, ideia horiekin, eta bestela, Pedro, zure da hitza eta zuk ingo dizu sarrera. Ni esker.
Egunon, agintariok, Andreok, egunon guztioi. Bueno, lo primero quiero agradecer al diputado y a la Diputación, sobre todo porque un proyecto tan bonito y tan importante como el sector que es una Eraikiz, pues oye, pues el poder participar, pues encantado, más mucha gente muy conocida y buenos amigos del mundo de la bio y de la competitividad. Bueno, pues hoy tenemos una persona que nos acompaña, Stepan Muigler, bueno, que la verdad es que lo primero que he hecho ha sido tranquilizarme, porque como presidente de Cámara he visto que no solo yo, cuando entras de presidente de Cámara te caen muchas, muchas y diferentes posiciones en diferentes ámbitos, sino que veo que también en Suecia pasa lo mismo. En segundo lugar, porque Suecia es un referente, no solamente en el ámbito de las cámaras de comercio. Cuando en el año 2010 se cambiaron la ley aquí en España, pues uno de los ejemplos que estuvimos analizando fueron los suecos, sino que también, pues desde el punto de vista de, como dice el diputado general, desde el punto de vista de la innovación. En el caso de la persona que nos acompaña, es presidente y CEO de la Cámara de Comercio del Sur de Suecia, desde el año 1997. Entendamos que las cámaras de comercio en Suecia son privadas. Sabéis, bueno, hay dos tipos de modelos: el modelo anglosajón, que es una cámara privada; el modelo francés, que era el que teníamos en el Estado; y ahora el modelo del Estado, que no es ni anglosajón ni francés, sino que es una cosa rara, que bueno, que solo que lo podemos entender aquí en España. Pero bueno, ese no es el libro de hoy. Tiene 2.800 miembros de todo tipo de tamaño de empresa y de sectores. Desde el punto de vista de su visión, evidentemente su misión es representar a las empresas. Dan servicios cualificados, sobre todo dirigidos a la competitividad internacional de sus empresas, y, por supuesto, hacen un networking muy importante a través de su red. Asimismo, es vicepresidente de Eurochambers, que es la organización que integra a todas las cámaras de comercio europeas. Pero además, y eso es lo que decía antes, Stefan Mückler es también presidente del Baltic Sea Chamber of Commerce and Association. Es presidente de IDEON, el Science Park. IDEON es un parque tecnológico, lo que llamamos aquí un parque tecnológico, que, para que os hagáis una idea, pues tiene empresas como Bosch, Sony, Ericsson, Volvo, Huawei, Texas Instruments o Schneider, y está focalizado en el transporte del futuro, en Smart Cities, en Smart Materials y en Connected Health, la famosa e-Health, que son temas, como veis, muy, muy importantes y muy interesantes. Además, es miembro del Consejo Rector del Baltic Development Forum, cuyo objetivo es hacer del Mar Báltico y de la región del Mar Báltico un centro de crecimiento más dinámico, innovador y competitivo. En estos momentos son 11 naciones y más de 100 millones de habitantes los que están alrededor de este, y su misión es el crecimiento anticipado y la competitividad en la región del Mar Báltico a través de asociaciones público-privadas entre empresas, el gobierno y el mundo académico. Como podéis ver, es un elemento muy, muy similar. Además, también es miembro del comité del aeropuerto de Copenhague. Además, es miembro de la Junta Directiva de los Consejos de Innovación e Investigación de la región de SCAN y del patronato de la Universidad Empresa de la Universidad de Lund. Lund es la universidad que está muy cerca de ellos y es con la que tienen también IDEON, que es el famoso parque empresarial. Además, Stefan Mückler es presidente de y ahora vienen los nombres un poco raros, Dr. P. Hackansons Foundation, que lo que hace es ayuda a la investigación a jóvenes investigadores en las universidades suecas que sobresalen en las áreas de la fisiología, química médica y química de los alimentos funcionales. En los últimos 10 años han aportado 27 millones de euros y para este año tienen un presupuesto de 3. Todo esto, ya veis que Internet es maravillosa y funciona muy bien. Además, también es, y este sí que va a ser raro y difícil, patrono de la Sparbankstiftelsen Fars and Frosta, que en definitiva, por lo que he entendido, es una organización sin ánimo de lucro independientemente. Sí, ya lo sé, sí. Luego le voy a decir mi tercer apellido, a ver qué tal lo pasa él. Pero bueno, eso ya vendrá más tarde, en el turno de preguntas. Pero que, digamos, es la parte que tiene que ver con, es un patronato que tiene que ver con las antiguas cajas, ¿de acuerdo? Las antiguas cajas, si perseguís en los años 90, lo que aquí ha pasado en el 2010, a ellos les pasó a finales de los 90, y bueno, es una fundación muy, muy similar. Y por último, digamos que es del Herbert Felix Institute. A mí esto me ha parecido muy interesante, porque es una organización sin ánimo de lucro independiente que opera y apoya y alienta los trabajos relacionados con la inmigración y con la capacidad de estos inmigrantes de generar proyectos empresariales. Y eso me ha parecido muy, muy importante. Además, esta fundación nace precisamente de un inmigrante que de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, bueno, pues este hombre genera su empresa y decide, bueno, pues crear una fundación para poder ayudar a los inmigrantes. Por lo tanto, como veis, nuestro ponente de hoy, Stefan Bückler, como veis, aburrirse no se aburre, tampoco. Bueno, y la conferencia de hoy. Bueno, la conferencia de hoy es el crecimiento de la industria avanzada en Suecia. En esta conferencia se van a abordar preferentemente las siguientes cuestiones. Por un lado, la transformación de la industria en el sur de Suecia, la apuesta de la ecoindustria y las tecnologías limpias, la estrategia de promoción de la industria biomédica, eso personalmente me interesa mucho, resultados y retos de futuro, la aportación del modelo de liderazgo colaborativo al desarrollo de la industria de la alta tecnología, el caso de Copenhague-Malmö, un referente europeo de cooperación transfronteriza y desarrollo económico, tal como ha hecho el diputado, estamos ahora trabajando en este tema. Sabéis que desde el año 2010 se generó una cámara transfronteriza con la Cámara de Bayona llamada Biartean, cuyo objetivo precisamente es avanzar. Y ahora estamos en un proceso estratégico con la nueva mancomunidad y con la incorporación de Navarra, con lo cual esto nos va a venir muy bien. El impacto de la inversión en infraestructuras en la competitividad empresarial del sur de Suecia. Y, por último, el Báltico, un espacio europeo de oportunidades integrado por esos 100 millones de habitantes, bueno, 85 en este caso, y 8 estados, Suecia, Dinamarca, Alemania, Finlandia, Polonia, Estonia, Letonia y Lituania. Bueno, pues creo que después de esta presentación, como podéis ver, tenemos a un magnífico ponente, por tanto, es que ricasco a la Diputación por haberlo traído, y sin más, pues oye, que sea el que a partir de ahora nos ilustre. Es que ricasco.
Thank you very much, dear friends. It's a pity my mother isn't here to hear that introduction of yours, what I've been doing over the last 28 years when I joined the chamber. I will be trying to give you a brief description of what's going on in southern Sweden, because I think it might be of interest to you. We are a border region, and we have some quite dramatic changes in our industry. But to understand that, if you allow me to start with some sort of background history. This is a map, and southern Sweden is, of course, familiar to you. You see Sweden is a quite big country geographically. And to understand how southern Sweden developed, I think you should say just some words about the industry. In southern Sweden, especially on the southwest coast, it was quite rich country with very productive farmers. We're going back to the late 19th century. So, and if you go further north, which also is a part of our chamber area. Our chamber area is, if you draw a line, I can show you on the map. Everything south of this. That would be southern Sweden, as we define it. Chamber of Commerce definition of the, we have another definition, and that gives you an idea of Sweden and history of Sweden, because in 1634, Axel Oxenstierna, he took over when the Swedish king Gustav II Adolf was killed in Lützen in Germany. His daughter, Queen Christina, she was only a kid, so this guy, Axel Oxenstierna, took over the governance of Sweden for a short period, and he introduced counties and appointed county governors. We still have them around since 1634. And the basic thing he had in mind was to keep the country quite split up, so that he can keep the force of the kingdom to have a possibility to really to control, etc., and to collect taxes. So we have, what I'm trying to say is, we have a very, very centralized political system in Sweden. So bear that in mind. In the more northern provinces of southern Sweden, at that time in the late 19th century, we had a lot of problems and starvation, and a lot of people actually were immigrants going to the U.S. So you have to bear this in mind, how it is a mixed picture of southern Sweden. What then happened, of course, what we built on, they had this farming industry that had, they started up production during industrialization, they set up factories, and this kind of factories were, of course, basically based on knowledge they had. We're talking about breweries, fermentation, we're talking about production of packaging materials later on. That's why Tetra Pak, you probably heard about that, was founded in southern Sweden. And because they, after a while, realized that when transportations got longer, they needed packaging, etc. So this is the kind of environment that we had and have had since then. What happened then, we have a really good period in southern Sweden with a lot of startups. We had the first car produced in Sweden, what typically was in southern Sweden. The first warehouse was opened in southern Sweden. So we had a very good spirit, and a lot of new companies founded in southern Sweden. And we had a really nice development, and even the parts of Småland, that parts I described as a bit poorer parts, where the people left for the US in the late 19th century. In the 20th century, things got better. And Swedes, we are actually engineers. That's how we made our fortune, so to say. We were a quite poor country, actually, 150 years ago. But we grew rich very, very fast by using natural resources and by producing industrial goods. It was cars, it was even airplanes and everything. So we have, to be quite a small country, we have a lot of export industries. And this came from this mindset, this mentality, where engineers putting up huge logistic solutions and be able to deliver on time, etc. We are not the marketing people that can sell everything, like the Danes, the neighbors. I'll come back to that later on. So this is the typical Swedish development, and they had a fantastic development in the early 20th century, especially in Malmö, and the area was growing, and regions were typically quite, industries and production was quite regional. We had some national investments, but you have to remember that they were maybe had their customers 200 kilometers away, not very much further, normally the basic ones. But then what happened was, of course, that we had a situation where we invested in infrastructure. We had a situation where we invested in education. And if you go back to the late 19th century, and this is something very important to bear in mind when we talk about industrialization, if future is in production or if future is in services, I think there is a bit of misunderstanding when we talk about that, because these are very much tied together. And I give you some examples. But 100 years ago or more, 87%, almost 9 out of 10 in Sweden, were actually using the physical production, either in farming or in industry or in mines or whatever. And 3 out of 100 were actually working with knowledge and services, in that case, with knowledge or information-based services. Today, and this might be a surprise, but today we have 50% of everyone working in Sweden are working with information and knowledge services. And only less than 20% are actually working with physical production. So what happened is, of course, that we produce more than ever. We produce more than ever in mankind. But the knowledge needed to be competitive in the new global environment is, of course, very, very much different. So when people 100 years ago actually could sell their products in the neighbors and maybe export something to Germany or Denmark or Norway or even Finland, so that it was really that kind of environment. But today, as I said, you have 50% working with knowledge-based services. They are, and you need those people to be competitive, because I would say the globalized world, the globalized economy is very much defined by, first of all, knowledge can travel without any costs, without any time delays, morally. And you have also access to transportation in a way you didn't have before. That means that if you produce something in one part of the world, it can easily be transported to another part of the world. And a lot of products are not physical products in the sense that they actually need to be shipped to another market. So that's one very important element of knowledge-based economy and globalization. And if you take how we travel, 100 years ago, the average person in Sweden working was actually moving 500 meters from the bed every day, in average. After the Second World War, it was 5 kilometers, and now it's 50 kilometers on average. You can imagine the difference we've seen over 100 years. I don't think ever in mankind that we had this kind of transformation or development when it comes to our habits of moving and seeing other areas or being able to work and adopt knowledge from other areas. That's also a very important part. If you cross a street in Singapore in rush hour once, you probably meet more person during that crossing than the average person in southern Sweden met during his or her whole lifetime. That gives you an impression of what we actually see today. Why am I explaining this, or why am I trying to tell you this? Because I think we really have to understand what is driving new industry and what are the factors behind creating this environment that is competitive, because it's tough. If you take the Öresund region, everyone is talking about the Öresund region. We have seen very good development over the last 20 years, and everyone is saying, "Oh, it's about the fixed link. You tied two regions together." It's one of the elements, of course, but it's only one. I would say what we see is we have a quite new environment in southern Sweden. It's the knowledge-based economy, of course, where you need skilled people, and you have to be able to attract skilled people to come to your region, to be an attractive region. And everyone is, of course, competing globally on that scale. And so you want to sell your region not only for tourists but for investments, etc. So this is a very, very important thing. And that also implies that you need to have good universities, and you have to have good even primary schools to have very skilled people. And we've been a bit worried about that during the last decades in Sweden. I don't know if you remember in detail the PISA statistics. Maybe you don't in detail remember it. But Sweden has been losing positions until recently. So we have actually had some problems in our school system. But on the other hand, we've been quite successful in attracting intelligent students to coming to Sweden or to Lund. Lund has a university, was founded 1666. And the reason why it was founded actually was because 1658, our part of Sweden became Swedish. It used to be Danish until 1658. And one way of making the people in southern Sweden Swedish was, of course, to found a university, which was a good thing. By the way, the 5 first Swedish universities, Uppsala and Lund, are the 2 only ones who still are on Swedish territory, because Sweden used to be a big country in the former days, if you go back hundreds and hundreds of years. Dorpat, Greifswald, and Åbo in Finland used to be part of Sweden, and there were founded universities in these places. But Lund University is a very important thing, and you also have the science park Ideon, was founded in 1983. And it has been a very interesting and important science park to drive and development of different innovations. I'll come back to that later. I'll give you just one example. I think everyone heard about Bluetooth technologies. They were actually developed in Ideon. So this is the environment. We have the globalization when it's very easy to travel. It's easy to send information overseas or wherever. And then, of course, we have something you probably don't think of. We had the fall of the Berlin Wall, because it's moved actually the development centers of Europe further to the north and further to the east. Because if you take Poland, or Eastern Germany, or the Baltic countries, they were more or less closed markets before, but they were our neighbors. And I remember when I was a kid, or even until the late 80s, when we came with a ferry, you had the Western Germany to the right and Eastern Germany to the left. And it was dark, you saw nothing, and on the western side there was a lot of things going on with the Timmendorf Verstand, with casinos, etc. So you saw it very clear. And this is very much the situation we had, and this has of course changed the map and the situation in southern Sweden, because suddenly we had interesting markets at our borders, more or less. Before, it was a lot of construction companies who actually made a deal with the former communist parties in East Germany or Poland, and then they built huge hotels or such. But that's basically what it was all about, nothing else. So that has actually changed the situation, the Berlin Wall. Another thing that changed the situation very much, and dramatically I would say, is the Swedish EU membership. We had a referendum in 1994. It's quite recently, actually. It's not that. It's 25 years ago, and where we actually joined the European Union. And it's a bit strange, actually. How come we were so late adopters? I would say that we had been very successful, as I said, during the 20th century. And if you are too successful, you don't question yourself. You say, okay, we are well off. Why should we be member of this? Okay, we have access to the market. But then, of course, it got more and more difficult to be outside of the European Union. So there was a referendum. Actually, my chamber was the first business organization in the 80s who actually said, we have to go for full membership in the European Union. And it was very much discussed, that's a dramatic step to take a part of the European Union, etc. But today everyone is in favor of the European Union, even if we know that the situation in the European Union and the cooperation is not as good as it should be or it could be, but still there is a vast majority of Swedish people in favor of the European, the membership in the European Union. And this changed the situation also. And then, of course, the fixed Öresund link, and this led to what I would say new market definitions, meaning that we had an environment with mature companies that were able to find skilled people, that were able to attract people from abroad to set up and drive projects in southern Sweden. Within the framework of Ideon or whatever, because the facilities were there. But when we got the fixed link, they changed a lot, because then we could start a real integration process with the Danish side. It was not just because the fixed link, but it was a very, very important thing, combined with the fall of the Berlin Wall and everything else. Because what happened now was that if you simplify it a bit, but it's basically true. What happened? We got a new market perception, because before the fixed link, most companies said, well, the market is Sweden. The center of the market is Stockholm, which is situated in the mid Sweden. So that's where we have to set up our headquarters or our hubs or facilities or sites to be active in Sweden. And this has actually harmed other parts of Sweden during many decades. I'm originally from northern Sweden, and we saw how the companies in northern Sweden moved to Stockholm and from Gothenburg, etc. So Stockholm was gaining a lot of power and development, economic development, thanks to these changes in. But now then suddenly people realized, well, okay, Sweden is a member of the European Union, we haven't implemented the euro, but is still a member, of course. And they look at the market and say, well, the market is not necessarily Sweden. It could be Baltic Sea area, it could be Northern Europe, it could be It could be what else, what you define. And so, for instance, the German car producer, Mercedes-Benz, closed its Swedish headquarters in Stockholm and did the same in Copenhagen, and reopened a new site, a headquarters for the Swedish-Danish market in Malmö. Because when they realized that the Öresund region it's about almost 4 million people, Stockholm area is about 2 million people. We have access to the right infrastructural situation with the Copenhagen airport, etc. And this means that as a hub for a new industry, it's a perfect geographical location. So this has actually changed it very, very, very much. In combination with this increased knowledge-based production, where we actually kept, because we think we were quite good at production, I think we still are, but we kept the base in production, but implemented a lot of knowledge and built on what we had. And I think that's very important. I can show what's happened here. This is I'm not sure my professor at the School of Economics had loved this, but it's, if you see on here you have the employment share in production, and here you have that in production of services. So what you see is, of course, a development where more and more people from 1980 or 93 are moving up here. A lot of people, much more people are moving and they're shifting the employment from being in the production to in services of production, so production of services, which in many cases are actually tied to physical production. The other thing that is important with this is, of course, that as the level of knowledge increases all the time, you need to find a market immediately, and that market is not only the neighbors. We still trade a lot, the most with our neighbors, of course, with Germany and Norway, etc. But the importance for new startups or companies to reach other markets has increased, because there is, maybe you have a little niche in producing. You take one example, Axis was founded by a friend of mine where we studied together at university. He founded this company, Axis, and they had an idea of putting up software. They made software and hardware combined to actually do something which at that time was quite difficult, to get communication of computers and printers, etc., in offices. And where do you have the market for that? It was, of course, a lot of Asian companies, American companies. So they started in Lund, and they immediately set up branches in US and in Asia, and they were very successful. And last year, actually, the company was bought by Canon. So my friend only owned 50% of it, but he was paid. Together were paid 2.3 billion euro. So, but his proportion was only half of it. I can tell you, he actually offered me a job 20 years ago. I'm not sure I did the right decision, but this is actually the kind of industries that you see. Then, of course, size matters. This is a bit of commercial for our region. If you talk to people from Stockholm, they always say, well, Stockholm is growing faster than everything else in Sweden. That's not true. Stockholm has been going from 2.1 million inhabitants in 2000 to 2.5. That's an increase of 426,000 people, 20%. Öresund, and you see in SE, that's only the Swedish part of the Öresund region, has been growing from 635,000 to 1.1 million over the same time period, 13 years. So that's an increase in 477,000 people. So this is also, of course, important when you are about to attract foreign investment and to be attractive for different companies. Another thing that normally is a problem in our country is accessibility. Accessibility, this is a European Union Regional Competitiveness Index, and this is a theoretical calculation of what region in Europe is the most accessible, and the most accessible is theoretically Köln, Colonia, and you see that's the green areas, and then you see the red, the dark red areas are the most difficult areas to reach by train, by car, by lorry, truck, and airplane, etc., and railway. By the way, anyone who knows what region within the European region is actually the most difficult to reach? Anyone? In Sweden, I say, if you know that, I will give you a bottle of champagne. I don't know if I dare to say it here, but it's actually French Guinea. It's also a part of the European Union. So that's the hardest region to reach. But this is a very important task, of course. And you see, we are quite good off down in southern parts of Sweden. It's partly, of course, thanks to the fixed link and our access to Copenhagen Airport, because Copenhagen Airport is extremely important for us. And maybe I'm a bit... I should be a bit cautious now, because I'm trying to describe the development behind the European spallation source. I know that was in this region where you were very keen on that investment, this material facility where you can actually study in detail nanotechnology. And one of the toughest reasons or the biggest arguments for Lund, where we see that investment coming up now, is our access to Öresund link and to, of course, the Copenhagen Airport. So this is the accessibility is very important. You can see if you invest in infrastructure, you increase the size of your region, because the size of the region is not defined in kilometers. It's defined in minutes and how easy it is to travel. We said in northern Sweden, because we have huge distances and very few people, and we were used to traveling, so we said it's not far unless you have to fill up your tank again in the car. And that's not applicable for southern Sweden, because they have been quite spoiled in this. But even in this perspective, we see how infrastructural investments and actually how these two counties that we had in Skåne, they were merged in 1997, which meant that you might think, well, it's just a merger of two administrative entities. Yes, but the thing was that they actually were able to improve public transportation. They had been very poor in incorporating over the county, the borders, but they were set up a new system, and suddenly people started to commute. That's why you see these impressive figures of the growth in the Malmö area, because people were able to commute in. And of course that's important for companies. You can get better access to skilled people. And in metropolitan areas, like let's say Stockholm or Paris or whatever, houses are quite expensive, of course. And even if you commute an hour or an hour and a half, it's still quite expensive if you're in the London area. That's not the case in southern Sweden, because you can easily, in half an hour, 40 minutes, have a house, a quite cheap house or a nice house at the coastline, and still you don't pay a fortune for. To buy a house in Stockholm, you have to pay 15 annually salaries. The same proportion in Malmö area is 9 times. Your salary has to be, annual salary has to be paid for the average price of a house. I mean, talking about prices. This is show the integrated region, and to the right you see how the prices of housing has been developed, and suddenly since 2008 or 9 or something, it's the correlation between Malmö, that's the red dotted line, and you see Copenhagen. Copenhagen and Denmark was very hard hit by the financial crisis, and Malmö is now actually more and more have the same situation as we have actually on the Danish side, which is quite remarkable because we have actually different currencies, and you have seen fluctuations. But even though the integration has been so close, so you can see how the prices of housing is actually correlating. Another thing is what happened with the airports. And in 2001, Copenhagen Airport was actually number 2 in the Nordic countries, with Stockholm as a bigger international hub with 18.2 million passengers. Last year, we passed 29,000 in Copenhagen, overtaking both Oslo and Arlanda by far. And this is, of course, very, very important to have this access to these direct links and to all this kind of access to markets all over the place. And since we got the fixed link, from my office, actually, on the Danish side, on the Swedish side, I reached the Danish side in less than 30 minutes. When I leave my chair, I take the railway, and I'm at the check-in counter within 30 minutes. Which of course has led to a tremendous development of what I said earlier, companies moving their headquarters from Stockholm area or other areas, setting up new headquarters in our area. And IKEA, you know, the furniture, the one you have to put together yourself if you manage. They actually have set up a new site called Hubhult, and it's the first stop on the Swedish side. It's a huge site where they collect all people from all the world. They come to the flight to Copenhagen and they take the train over, and they actually meet at this Hubhult. They are even constructing an own hotel, just close to this Hubhult. Everyone in the area are happy, except of the other hotels and the rental cars dealers, because they lose a lot of money from IKEA, because it's a lot of money. I think they're talking about 18,000 people coming annually just to the site. 18,000. That's one company. Okay, it's a huge company, but it shows the dimension of it. If you're able to set up this kind of logistic solutions, and you're close to an airport or a good infrastructure facility, it's really, really important, because you need access to the globe. So if you to try to conclude what's happening in the Öresund region, today we are 3.9 million people. We are actually 1/4 of the Swedish and Danish population, and we are 25% of the Swedish and the Danish GDP. We have 170,000 students, and we have tomorrow the European Spallation Source coming up. And we also have another facility that's already is existing. It's so-called MAX4, where different kinds of investigating materials in the really, really smallest pieces and nanotechnology. And in European Spallation Source, you do it in an accelerator and in MAX4 it's using light, actually. Don't ask me to describe it any more in detail, because I really don't know, but it's supposed to be a state-of-the-art, and actually people are coming from all over the world just to see this. And we have a lot of companies actually are interested in coming to just examine their materials and see what's going on here. So that's very much what's going on. We will have a fixed link to Germany, which makes it even better for us, this accessibility. Will be the construction of a tunnel between Rødby and Puttgarden. It's an enormous investment. It will mean when it's ready in 2023 or something, or 26 maybe, it's always a delay. If you have with German bureaucrats to do, it can take a while, you know. And they have an environmental protection legislation that's not so easy. Actually, a friend of mine, he works with the environmental department in the Danish government. When the Germans sent their material to the Danes, their server crashed. So that because it was 10 times as many pages and papers on the German side as on the Danish side. They even had a truck with a paper physical driving over just to get delivered to the Danes, the material that the Germans had. So that's important. Here is another. It's totally unreadable, but it's an example of companies actually since 2003 set up their headquarters in Malmö, Öresund area, just based on this new market definition, using infrastructure, using the access to students, to skilled people, and to this quite good environment when it comes to housing. And I think this is the lesson learned is of course what you all know, that you have different situations in different regions, and you have different development. This is a map that shows in the dark green areas are the most prosperous in terms of domestic production per capita, and you see big differences. Even in Sweden you see some yellow areas where it's in northern Sweden, and you see green and dark green areas in Sweden. So it's not true anymore that you see what you create on a national level is what's setting the scene, so to say, because it's very much, you have a global open economy, capital and investments can easily move from one part to another, then it's very important that you on a regional basis have very good facilities. And it's very tough to find the right mixture and know what it's all about. But if I'm about to conclude, I would say it's very, very important that you have access to good infrastructure, accessibility, and to good people, to skilled people. And if you have that, and you have in other terms good factors, it's much, much easier for you to be have a competitive environment. It's easy to say, and it's hard to develop, but I think it's one problem I see when I deal with some local politicians and regional politicians, that they compare themselves with the neighbors, with the neighbor countries. That's not the case. You have to compare yourself. The benchmark has to be an equal developed region or better developed region all over the world. Because investments are not choosing between Malmö and Växjö in our case, because they're choosing maybe between Malmö and Berlin or Bilbao or whatever. So that's the perception you need to have, and that's the view you need to have on this one. I was asked to say something about clean tech and biotech, and let me start with biotech. We have an old tradition, as I said, in southern Sweden, by all the farms, fermentation, chemistry. So we have a lot of companies in these fields. But of course, there were a lot of mergers and acquisitions. A lot of companies were bought, they were sold again. There were some few were closed down. But the one who survived were actually the ones who were seeking new solutions, who were trying to find the best people, who were trying to sell their exports, the products on export, and were successful in this. It's quite obvious, but even though, what we see is also, and this is partly underestimated, that now and then a crisis can be a good thing. If you see companies who actually take, for instance, Ericsson, Sony Ericsson, they had a huge, and still have a site at Ideon, this mobile cellular phone company, phone company. And during, this market's been going up and down, and there were crises, and then and now and then, of course, they were reduced the working staff, and a lot of people actually who stopped at Ericsson set up their own companies. And had used their former employers as the first customer, because they had an idea. What can I do with this idea? Can I sell this product? So they have a setup of that, and that's the same when it comes to biotech. We had, for instance, a huge plant for AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca actually decided, because it was bought and it's not more in Swedish hands, so they decided to close the site in Lund. And everyone thought might be a disaster. Of course, it was a problem. And they had 700 staff members, AstraZeneca, say, well, you have an opportunity to move to Gothenburg, or you can go to Boston, or you can go to somewhere. And they thought, the company, well, we have a lot of good, skilled people moving to Gothenburg. And so that's not the case. And I think there were 14 people moving. The other ones were actually setting up their own companies. They were startups, and they were competent in other fields, and so they could easily get jobs in other areas. What happened was that this facility that they had, AstraZeneca, is now run by a foundation, and it's called Medicon Village, where you can actually easily, if you're a startup in this industry, you can easily get a laboratory or rent a space, an office, etc. And this is how you can use the crisis and how it has been used. The biochemical the biochemical industry in southern Sweden was, as I said, very much about pharmaceutical, but also about Håkansson. You tried to this foundation. Håkansson was a very interesting guy because he was in the late 19th century. He set up a production of different chemical substances that were actually used for production of food. And then he realized that this could also be used in medical treatment. So that's how it started, actually, from this. So Håkansson Foundation is based on the money he made on the production of difficult chemistries, and it made it able for other people to invest in that field. So it's this kind of clusters. It's not very easy to understand how they are created, but most it has to do with people working in one area, in one industry, moving to another industry and to a startup or something. And don't underestimate the importance of having people in different fields doing this kind of the same thing. So we have Medicon Village. We also have a biomedical center at the university, which is a part of the university and the hospital. And there we have a lot of public money. And the first one I mentioned was a lot of private money invested by entrepreneurs in the region. It wouldn't give you very much information or give you more if I in detail describe what they are doing, but I can easily, if you're interested, connect you to people who actually work in these different organizations, so you can learn about it yourself. Or if you're interested more in detail, I think you should go there. I think maybe you can learn something about it. That was the buy. Then of course we have this cluster in Öresund also. But if you look at the Öresund region, I think we consist 65% of all healthcare investments in the Nordic countries. So we are very, very strong, and it's based both on commercial, industrial cooperation and on cooperation between the university or different universities. We have many universities in the area. The other one area is the clean tech industry, and also has very much to do with agriculture, biogas, and of course to avoid pollution and transportation and water, purify water. And we have some good companies. And we have a cluster set up, a clean tech cluster that actually try to find new solutions. And what these two clusters, also the medical, even if the medical cluster is tougher because they are more watching on each other, they are not so very keen on giving ideas and away. But when it comes to clean tech, there is very much an idea of open innovation. So they invite competitors that see them more like colleagues and to find new solutions. And also the same thing here. I can really easily connect you to people working in this area. And these are the very strongest industries within this field. Agriculture, of course, southern Sweden is agricultural landscape. Biogas, using also for cars and trucks. Transportation, obvious, we need to transport a lot in a big country, and water purification, when you purify water. we have a lot of good mineral waters, and actually a drilling company called Malmbergs, they discovered it, and they source on their own land. So they do drilling equipment and cleaning equipment and sell it all over the world. And then suddenly they found source on their ground, so they even sell water now from Malmbergs. So this is our very, very brief description, and as I said, I can easily give connect you to people working in this. So what I've been trying to tell you is, of course, I realize it's a very tough to in a short time describe what's going on. And how do you develop more a competitive in the production industry? I think it's to conclude. This is what I told the Swedish Prime Minister some months ago. To conclude, it's all about, first of all, knowledge. You have to have the best knowledge. You have to have infrastructure. You have to have, of course, the attitude, the right attitude to question yourself, not to sit, oh, we've been doing this, we are good at this, let's keep the system. We have to really to find new solutions. And then, of course, to have this open innovation. I believe very much in open innovation. We sit down with people, with skilled people from different areas. I think I gave you an example of the paper production, the Stora Enso. It's a Finnish-Swedish company, and I met with a site manager some years ago, and he said, "Look, I have a huge plant. We're producing paper for newspaper, and we know we have a problem with it. It won't be a growing market. What shall I do?" "I don't know," I said. Of course I didn't know. But I said, you go to Ideon and you talk to the guys working with what's so-called open innovation. What's that? You sit down with these people, you describe a problem, and there are people from different science areas, and then it started. Now they actually implemented or trying to sell the first products made out of this wood or paper wood, the paper they actually can produce. Because they opened their mind and let other people in, and they actually re-engineered the whole company. So this is actually the best advice I can give you. It's not really an easy one, and I don't think it's easy to find the quick fix or the quick solutions. You have to struggle. It's not a nice, clean marketing view, but it's hard work. It's all about it's infrastructure, skilled people, and the right attitude, and of course, football. Just ask you, what do you know the best Swedish football club over the years? They are actually now Swedish champions for the moment. Javier, you know? Malmö, of course, Malmö FF. And this is the stadium. And as I said, if you are coming to Malmö, just let me know. And we have tickets. So if you let me know in advance, I'll invite you to a game with Malmö FF. Thank you for listening to me. I suppose if any questions or yes. Thank you.
Eskerrik asko, Mugler jauna. Ordu erdi inguru edo daukagu solasaldirako, nahiko genuke solasaldi ireki bat egitea. Uste dut mai gainean punte asko geratu direla, ezagutzaren aldeko apustua, azpiegituren aldeko apustua, jarrera kontua dela, eta hemengo salan dagoen jendeari begira eta lehen galdera, una pregunta para los dos, pero sobre todo para el invitado sueco. Una de las apuestas, como ha dicho el diputado general al principio, de Euskadi y en particular de Guipúzcoa, es la apuesta por las biociencias. ¿Cuál es la apuesta sueca en el ámbito de las biociencias, tanto la pública, privada, de lo que ves que está pasando y de las tendencias hacia dónde camina el país, la industria? ¿Cómo lo ves y cómo lo veis?
I think there are different trends, actually, and one trend is, of course, that you have these huge companies and they merged to try, typically AstraZeneca. We had a lot of pharmaceutical companies in southern Sweden and in Sweden as a whole, but they merged, and they were some of them moved their headquarters, and I think this is my personal opinion, but that's, I think some politicians were quite naive. They thought, okay, we will move the headquarters to London. It doesn't matter because London is a huge market. It will help us to reach that market. I'm not sure about that, actually. I think it's quite tough because now and then a company gets into trouble, and it's much easier to close a plant outside the headquarters than really close to the headquarters. So and I think people realize that now. So this striving for politics to make it easy for these huge companies to have good market conditions or be competitive has now shifted to another policy where you actually the politicians try to find solutions where small companies, startups can grow, and it's about taxation, fiscal system, etc. So this is the basic trend. The other trend is, of course, that, or you asked me about if it's a public or private. I think it's very much both, and I think to be competitive in future, you really have to have this cooperation between public sector and private sector. Basically, because sometimes, and today even we got an experience of that here, where you need statistics, you need material to check your studies, etc. One case is the Malmö food cancer study. Has been for 30 years. They studied an enormous material of statistics that could be used in the pharmaceutical industry. And that's a good thing by Sweden. We have a very open society in the terms that you can find statistics of everything, and it's open to everyone. If you lived in Sweden and if you had a tax declaration, I can see what you earn. It's open for everyone. You can have your opinion about it, but when it comes to healthcare and this kind of industries, that kind of statistics helps a lot. That's a long answer. Did you?
Bueno, yo creo que aquí es un poco diferente, ¿no? Yo creo que primero por tamaño. O sea, nosotros no tenemos ahí empresas, evidentemente, del sector salud importantes, pero no esos tamaños, ¿no? Yo creo que aquí estamos en un cambio de modelo ahora mismo. Hasta el año 2008, fundamentalmente la investigación, el desarrollo de ese sector venía muy apoyado por el sector público, por la administración pública. Evidentemente, después de la crisis del 2008, bueno, pues la administración tiene ahora mismo, pues bueno, pues todo el estado del bienestar, etcétera. Bueno, pues eso le lleva pues a limitar muchísimo su apoyo. Esto lo que ha hecho ha sido que, bueno, que nuestras empresas tengan que mirar al mercado, a una financiación alternativa. Yo creo que la buena pregunta sería, pues bueno, cómo conseguimos el famoso Valle de la Muerte, ese venture capital que todavía hoy no disponemos claramente y no porque no exista, sino porque bueno, no hay experiencia y todavía no hemos conseguido encontrar las herramientas para que fluya, ¿no?, a las empresas. Yo creo que es el gran reto. Yo creo que hoy por hoy la administración, y tanto a través de la sanidad pública vasca como con las empresas, hoy estamos trabajando cada vez más de manera conjunta pues, para dar soluciones. Las empresas son conscientes de que tienen que mirar al mercado, cosa que hasta ahora no era tanto así, porque su financiador era el sector público, por tanto buscaba las necesidades del sector público. Bueno, pues ahora llega el momento de hacer esa transformación. Creo que tenemos buenos mimbres, las empresas lo hacían bien antes y lo siguen haciendo bien ahora, y bueno, ahora lo que tenemos que encontrar es bueno, pues, ese punto. Y luego, por otro lado, darnos cuenta, sobre todo para la generación de fármacos o de soluciones, que llegar al enfermo, llegar a la sanidad pública a nivel internacional es muy difícil. Es carísimo. Por lo tanto, en nuestro caso tenemos que ser conscientes de que nosotros tenemos que desarrollar productos dentro de la cadena de valor y desarrollar los productos hasta un punto. Luego ahí lo tienen que coger los grandes del sector a nivel mundial, que son los que las tienen que coger y hacerlo y llevarlo adelante. Por lo tanto, creo que también el enfoque de nuestras empresas, hasta dónde tienen que llegar o dónde está, quién es su cliente, bueno, pues creo que también lo estamos haciendo y poco a poco lo estamos centrando en el sector.
En este cambio de de modelo, en este cambio de modelo hacia la nueva economía, la apuesta por las biociencias, no tanto del producto al servicio, y ahí veíamos los datos también del sur de Suecia. En la industria del automóvil, de la automoción, por ejemplo, se ven los coches. La sociedad entiende perfectamente cuando se hace una apuesta, tanto pública como privada, por la automoción, por ejemplo, a qué nos referimos. Cuando decimos, hablamos de la economía del conocimiento, de apuestas sobre las biociencias y tal, no se ve tan claramente, ¿no?, esa apuesta. ¿Cómo explicamos a la sociedad estas apuestas que no se ven? Nosotros vemos la aspirina final quizá, pero no vemos todo el proceso ni el empleo que hay ahí, ¿no? Y cómo legitimamos en una sociedad esa apuesta de territorio, de país, por las biociencias.
Well, but it's good. I think it goes for many industries, not only biotech. And you see young, typically in the young generation, when they see some, especially if it's a software or an artist, a musical, they think it should be for free because it's digital. So this perception of what's the product, I think we're in the product is, I think it was indirectly described by looking at the numbers working with the knowledge behind something. Even if it's a aspirin, or if it's something other even more tangible physical product, the knowledge behind it, that's what you pay for. You don't buy an aspirin. You buy a solution to your headache or whatever it is. And I think we have to get that into our mindset, and you have to be able to convince your customers that that's what it's all about. When I was young and I got my driver's license, I was dreaming of a fancy car. If I talk to young guys and girls today, they say, well, some of them still think they need a fancy car, but most of them say, no, I need to have a transportation from point A to point B. And then I don't need to pay for, I mean, for instance, now I can afford a big Mercedes. And my oldest, I said to him, I'm going away for this weekend. Do you need a car? No, I don't. Where should I put it? For him, it's just a way of going from A to B, nothing else. And I think this is a way of thinking, the perception. And that's what you have to explain to people, and that's what they're paying for. A solution on a problem, not a physical product.
Yo coincido más, fíjate, si nos fijamos en un caso de automoción, como es el caso de Hiriko, ¿no?, del coche eléctrico, ¿alguien pensó en algún momento que íbamos a fabricar coches eléctricos y van a tener una fábrica de coches eléctricos en Euskadi? Ese era el objetivo. Claro, si la gente entendió esto, evidentemente ha sido un fracaso. Ahora, si lo que entendemos es que tenemos la automoción tiene un peso brutal en nuestra economía, que viene el coche eléctrico que necesita de unas piezas totalmente diferentes, que para poder hacerlas tenemos que invertir en que todos juntos desarrollemos esas piezas, que para eso, si desarrollamos un prototipo de coche eléctrico, toda nuestra industria de automoción va a estar trabajando para ello. Y si además entendemos que cuando esa industria venda 100 millones de euros, recuperará lo que se ha invertido, pues fíjate cómo en un caso parece un fracaso y en otro caso es un gran éxito. Y creo que ahora mismo la sociedad no lo está viendo como un éxito precisamente. ¿Por qué? Pues porque el overpromise. Es decir, cuando tú al final lo más importante es lo que la gente va a entender. Es decir, tenemos que entender que la gente al final lo importante, como decía Stefan, es decir, al final la gente lo importante es el producto del producto. Yo no me compro una pasta de dientes, me compro dientes limpios, dientes sanos, dientes sin sarro. Es eso lo que yo compro. Si la gente entiende lo que estamos haciendo, lo que realmente buscamos y lo que hay por detrás de eso, no habrá ningún problema. Otra cosa es que lo dejemos, oye, que vamos a hacer un coche eléctrico, o que digamos que vamos a hacer... Hoy tenemos capacidad más que suficiente para curar muchas enfermedades, porque el conocimiento de nuestros científicos está. Otra cosa diferente es, ¿pero podemos llevar eso al mercado, a que la gente...? No tenemos esa capacidad. ¿Por qué? Pues porque llevar un fármaco viene a costar de orden de 2.000, 3.000 millones de euros. Y no tenemos empresas, ni tan siquiera creo que territorio, como para poder hacer esto. Pero sí tenemos la capacidad para generar hoy. Además, esas empresas, por cierto, ya no están desarrollando, las grandes farmacéuticas ya no están desarrollando los productos, sino que lo que han decidido es que sean otros los que lo desarrollen y que ellos los compran. Hay una meta. Claro que hay una meta en la cual están esperando las farmacéuticas con mucho dinero, pero ¿para qué? Para aquel que demuestre que es capaz de curar. Y para eso sí tenemos capacidad, más que suficiente. Luego, por tanto, tenemos que cambiar el enfoque, tenemos que explicar a nuestra gente qué es lo que vamos a hacer. Y ojalá, y lo digo así de claro, seamos capaces de generar 5 o 6 empresas que generen 5 o 6 productos y mañana tener una gran farmacéutica. Bueno, sería, vamos, ¿dónde hay que firmar? Lo firmamos ahora mismo. Pero ese no es el caso hoy. Por lo tanto, ¿podemos curar enfermedades? Sin duda. ¿Podemos llevarla al mercado? Hoy no. Y por último, la gente, tener en cuenta que muchísima gente que se va, no sé, al MD Anderson de Houston, etcétera, que se va en teoría a por milagros para el cáncer o para cualquier enfermedad, no va por milagros. Va por ensayos clínicos, que son productos que hoy todavía no están en el mercado, pero que ya se pueden usar en humanos y se están testando en humanos. ¿Podemos llegar ahí? Sin duda. ¿Tenemos sanidad para hacerlo? Más que de sobra. ¿Las capacidades? Lo que pasa es que no vendamos que vamos a llegar al mercado y que tendremos un gran fármaco y que el fármaco que va a curar no sé qué enfermedad va a ser vasco, sino que vendamos, no, ese fármaco se va a crear en Euskadi y a través de los canales que existen en estos momentos llegará al mercado. Y entonces la gente dirá, bueno, pues ahora lo entiendo.
Creo que había una pregunta por aquí, no sé si tenemos micrófono. Sí.
Egunon. Oh, right by.
Bai.
Egunon, beraz segituko dut Englishez. I'm going to continue in English. There you go, take it off. So I'm from the other side of the border, and I came here this morning because I'm interested in talking about how we can do cross-border working, because I'm in the northern Basque Country on the French side, and I own a company, and I'm just 20 minutes across the border, and for years we've been talking about finding a solution to how people can find a solution to be able to like live in one place, work in another place, and how we can have some kind of specific like working conditions and be able to have the whole health system work, etc. And this has now been years that we've been talking about this, and we haven't been able to get it off the ground. So for the first time in centuries, we finally, in the northern Basque Country, have our own county. So we're going to be able to start developing programs. And I'm hoping that you're all here that we will do this together, because I represent civil society and all of the nonprofit organizations. I also represent the Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber of Agriculture, and the Chamber of Artisans. And we are all of the whole economic sector is very interested in developing programs with you here in Gipuzkoa and in Euskadi, so that we can all kind of start working together on either side of our border. What have you done in Sweden, in Norway, with Finland, especially since you have different, it's not, you're not all in the euro. How do you do this?
The euro, actually. It's a very interesting topic that you bring up, and this is the situation in the Nordic countries changed in 1953, actually, when we had this Nordic passport union. That meant that no one needed, if you were a citizen of the Nordic countries, you could travel around without any problems. And when it started, people started to work on the other side of the border. It was basically normally not a problem, but stupidly enough, seen from my point of view, there was a change in taxation system some years ago, which meant that you are in Sweden and Denmark now supposed to pay your taxes where you work, not where you live. And this has created enormous trouble for us. A lot of people who actually, if you work on one side, and live on the other ones. And solutions have been found, but it takes a while. And the understanding from Stockholm, the central power in Stockholm, has been very, very little. It's better on the Danish side because the Danes see the problem, of course. But we have been striving to get simplifications in fiscal and legal systems, etc. But it's a hard fight, and this fight has to has to continue because I can understand, because you have a Danish national system and you have a Swedish system, or you have a Norwegian, of course, and we have a welfare states, but are financed very differently. So that's why that creates these problems. In Sweden, you have as an employer, you have to pay a lot of fees for social insurance. In Denmark, the employer himself, the employees pay it themselves. And you can imagine all the differences. I suggested now to, I think, 3 or 4 Swedish ministers of finance, and I said to them, can't you just implement a system where you can choose where to pay taxes? And they all looked at me and said, are you crazy? Of course we can't. You realize what that would mean? No, I don't, I said. And I said, because then we will maybe lose tax incomes to Denmark or vice versa. Yeah, but I remind them that there is a tax agreement between Denmark and Sweden that said that if there are any imbalances, the state should compensate each other, not the individual person who has it. So maybe you can start with a bilateral tax agreement, or agreement where you can you have where the welfare systems are actually adjusted to each other. But it's a tough thing. Not all politicians in Stockholm love me. Varsågod.
Yo creo que una de las claves del éxito de la cooperación transfronteriza en la región de Øresund ha sido un poco encontrar la complementariedad o los puntos fuertes, o saber complementar los puntos fuertes entre el área danesa y el área sueca. ¿Cuáles son? O sea, you told me yesterday, pero me gustaría saber, o sea, ¿qué aporta quién y cómo habéis llegado a esa complementariedad? ¿Cuál ha sido el camino para llegar a esa complementariedad? Que es un poco las claves, ¿no?, de la cooperación transfronteriza.
That's a very interesting question, because first, before the inauguration of the bridge, we thought, oh, we are Scandinavians, we're very much alike, so it won't be any problem. We have the fixed link, and until Christmas we will be all brothers and understand each other. That was not the case, because we realized that, I mean, if you go to China, you prepare yourself. Oh, that's a different language, a different culture, how do they function, what should I do? But we thought, we've been in Denmark, everyone in Skane has been in Denmark, so we thought it was no problem. We realized that the Danes are marketing people. They don't know anything, I'm exaggerating a bit, about production or something, but they're very good marketing, wheeling and dealing. They are commercially very, very smart people. And we, on the Swedish side, we are the opposite, because, as I said, we grew rich by using natural resources. So we are a bit less, I mean, we're more Germanic in the sense that we deliver, you have to do that, and you said at 8 o'clock, it should be 8 o'clock, etc. And when we realized the differences, actually it meant that we could use it. That's what, in practice, you never send in a Swedish salesperson to negotiate with a Danish salesperson. You get yourself an own Danish salesperson representing yourself. A bit exaggerated, of course, but that's more or less. But it took a while until we realized that there were differences. Even if you've been living, it's 4 kilometers at the most narrow point, and between Malmö and Copenhagen, it's 10 or 12 kilometers. It's not more. So we have really been traveling over that sound for hundreds of years. But even though we underestimated the differences when we inaugurated the bridge.
Yo siempre hablo de que hay dos fronteras, la física y la mental. Yo creo que nosotros hemos tenido un problema de frontera mental. O sea, la frontera física ha caído, pero la mental no ha caído. Y en segundo lugar, cuando yo llegué, me acuerdo, en el 2010 a la Cámara, se estaba preparando un proyecto de posible ley que se quería presentar en Europa para crear las cámaras de comercio transfronterizas. Lo cual me parecía una cosa como muy, no sé, fuera de lugar. Decía, vamos a cambiar nosotros la ley en Europa, y además como va Europa, la velocidad que va Europa. Entonces, al final, lo que decidimos fue que para la Cámara transfronteriza, para Vía Artean, es la colaboración entre gente que no se conoce o que no quiere colaborar mucho, o que no tiene dudas de colaborar. En cuanto pones un proyecto que es win-win, o sea, para las dos partes ganan, colaboran enseguida. Siempre. Yo he visto empresas que no se hablaban, que se les ha puesto un proyecto común y han salido a la reunión con un acuerdo. Por lo tanto, el objetivo, ¿cuál debe de ser? No solamente, decir, ¿qué es? Primero cambio la ley para los proyectos que vengan, o primero busco proyectos, veo lo que necesito y entonces automáticamente todo cambia. Porque para la propia administración, claro, si la administración dice, oye, si yo hago este cambio, genero más ingresos porque genero nuevos proyectos, irá mucho más rápido que, oye, vamos a cambiar porque a lo mejor esto puede generar oportunidades. Por lo tanto, creo que hay muchos proyectos, estoy convencido, y en Vía Artean lo estamos encontrando, con la entrada de la mancomunidad del País Vasco y con la entrada de Navarra en la región se están generando todavía muchos más. Por lo tanto, trabajemos para buscar esos proyectos y no tengamos ninguna duda que si los proyectos son positivos, la velocidad será mucho mayor.
Beste galderarik, bueno, ez lanik, ekonomia globalean, eta ez...
Football.
Ekonomia globalean eta ezagutzaren ekonomian, lehiakortasuna mundu mailakoa da, eta lehia mundu mailan gaude. Eta aipatu duzu, lehen ezagutza mantentzea, lantzea, eta hor dago talentuaren, erronka hori, talentua mantendu, erakarri, zeintzu dira Suedian eta zuen erregioan dazkazuen politikak edo talentua erakartzeko, edo bertan dagoena lantzeko eta bertan geratzeko.
I think it's very hard to have a policy in terms of legislation that's specifically set up to attract people. You see an example in countries where they set up different zones, where tax-free zones, etc. I don't think in the long run that will function. You can't cut corners. I think it's basically you have to establish yourself, your region, as a well-known region where you can have an easy life and an interesting life, interesting working experience. And it's easy to say. I realize that, but that's the only way to attract people. And if you have projects going on important or interesting enough, people will come. That's why, I mean, when Ericsson set up in Ideon at the Science Park, then Sony came, and then they merged, and then Huawei came. They all came. Bosch entered because they said, we got to be there because something is going on there. That's what it's all about. It's very hard to set up a policy, as you could do in former days. To say, this area, it's tax-free for 20 years, please. But knowledge travel too fast to do that kind of, according to my experience.
Yo creo que, antes lo comentábamos, ¿no? Yo creo que ahora estamos en la guerra del talento. Ya no es guerra financiera, y ahora es la guerra de atraer el talento. Pero el talento atrae a talento. Siempre ha pasado. O sea, mi abuelo decía que los buenos se juntan con los buenos y los malos con los malos. Pues aquí pasa lo mismo. Entonces, yo sí creo que el talento, pues, ¿qué necesita? Pues necesita ciudades conectadas, ciudades que vivan en inglés, heterogeneidad, necesita, por supuesto, empresas, necesita poder desarrollarse. Es decir, yo creo que el talento, creo que tenemos muchas razones en ambas zonas como para poder atraerlo, pero también una de las cosas que necesita, sin duda alguna, y no quiero ser reiterativo, pero es financiación. Es decir, ese talento, al final, en muchas ocasiones, el talento realmente se está dirigiendo donde se le da capacidad para desarrollarse. Y una de las capacidades que hay, evidentemente, es la financiera. Por lo tanto, sí creo que es un aspecto, más que fiscalidad, que también, por supuesto, pero la fiscalidad es mucho más para las empresas o los fondos que pueden invertir. Para las personas que vienen es mucho más importante, van a pagar prácticamente, yo creo que los mismos impuestos en cualquier parte a la que vayan, digo el talento, por lo tanto, para ellos es mucho más importante la capacidad de desarrollo que tengan y dentro de esa capacidad de desarrollo está la heterogeneidad con la que se van a encontrar a nivel de personas, de empresas y de proyectos.
Bueno, ordubia dira, bukatzeko beste galderarik ez balimago, ni bai, bi galdera labur gaurko gure gonbidatu nagusiarentzat. Batetik zure bisita, hemengo agenda eta ezagutu dituzun proiektuak eta ezagututa nola ikusten gaituzu zure esperientziatik, hemen bisita honetan nola ikusten gaituzu. Eta bigarrena, gaur iluntzean zer egingo du Realak?
Three one, first of all. No, I'm very impressed. I have to admit I've been in Spain a lot, but I haven't been in your region, and it will certainly not be the last time I'm here. I had a fantastic weekend, and it was very impressive what we saw today. And I was very amazed, and I knew about your machinery industry and energy. But the biotech, I didn't know that. And I think maybe we can get some connections in the biotech society in our northern region to help each other in both ways. I'll be back.
Eskerrik asko, Mujle jauna, eta eskerrik asko Naola jauna. Iruditzen bazaizue, txalo bero batekin, utzi dugu.